Imagine standing on a windswept beach, sword in hand, facing your greatest rival under the rising sun. The crash of waves punctuates the silence between two warriors, each knowing that within moments, one shall continue their journey while the other's path ends forever. This moment defined not only the life of Miyamoto Musashi, but also the essence of what it means to be a warrior. A blend of discipline, strategy, and unyielding spirit that transcends the mere clash of steel. For in Musashi's hands, the sword was never simply a weapon. It was a manifestation of his soul, a physical extension of his philosophical understanding of existence itself. The Japan that welcomed Miyamoto Musashi into the world around 1584 was a land torn by constant warfare. Born in Harima Province, modern-day Hyogo Prefecture, during the tumultuous Sengoku period, aptly named the Age of Warring States, young Musashi's earliest memories would have been colored by the sounds of distant battles and tales of samurai glory. This era saw powerful daimyo, feudal lords, vying for supremacy, their armies clashing across the Japanese archipelago in a struggle that would eventually give birth to the Tokugawa shogunate and centuries of relative peace. Yet peace was far from Musashi's early reality. His father, Shinmen Munisai, was himself a skilled swordsman who served the Shinmen clan. From him, Musashi would inherit not only martial ability, but also a complex legacy. According to some accounts, Munisai was a harsh and distant figure, perhaps explaining why the young boy would develop such fierce independence. While historical records of Musashi's childhood remain fragmentary, what emerges clearly is the image of a youth forged in isolation, teaching himself the rudiments of swordsmanship through relentless practice rather than formal instruction. The decisive moment in Musashi's evolution came startlingly early. At the mere age of 13, the boy who would become legend accepted his first formal duel against Arima Kihei, an experienced swordsman from the Shinto-ryu school. When Kihei posted a challenge seeking opponents in Musashi's village, the brash youth answered with the confidence of one who had not yet learned the meaning of fear. What followed would become the first chapter in Musashi's extraordinary saga. As the duel commenced, the adult warrior Kihei likely expected little challenge from the boy before him. Yet what Musashi lacked in formal training, he compensated for with raw intuition and fearlessness. According to accounts of the duel, young Musashi charged his opponent with unexpected ferocity, tackling Kihei to the ground before striking a fatal blow with a wooden staff. This victory, unorthodox and shocking to witnesses, established a pattern that would define Musashi's approach throughout his life: pragmatic, unconventional, and devastatingly effective. Following his initial triumph, Musashi did not seek the structured path of most samurai, where others might attach themselves to established schools or master swordsmen. He chose instead a nomadic existence, wandering the provinces of Japan and honing his techniques through direct experience. The traditional way would have placed him under the tutelage of a renowned teacher, living in a dojo and progressing through formalized ranks. Musashi rejected this approach entirely, believing that true mastery could only emerge from one's own discoveries and insights. This solitary journey began in earnest after the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, a watershed conflict that effectively ended the Warring States period. Though only 16, Musashi allegedly fought on the losing side, supporting the Western forces of Ishida Mitsunari against Tokugawa Ieyasu. The defeat sent the young swordsman into his famous Musha Shugyo, a warrior's pilgrimage of testing and refinement that would continue for decades. During these wandering years, Musashi lived with remarkable austerity. He rarely bathed, seldom cut his hair, and wore simple, often tattered clothing. These habits earned him the nickname Kensei, Sword Saint, reflecting both reverence for his skills and acknowledgement of his eccentric detachment from conventional society. Yet this apparent disregard for appearance reflected not laziness, but rather single-minded focus. Every waking moment was devoted to perfecting his understanding of combat and strategy. Perhaps Musashi's most revolutionary contribution to the art of swordsmanship was his development of Niten Ichi-ryū, the two heavens as one technique of fighting with both long and short swords simultaneously. While other schools occasionally employed both blades, Musashi elevated this approach to unprecedented heights, using the wakizashi, short sword, not merely as a backup weapon, but as an equal partner to the katana in a harmonious dance of offense and defense. This innovation flew directly in the face of established tradition. Classical samurai schools emphasized the one-handed wielding of a single blade, with precise, formalized movements practiced until they became instinctive. Musashi's approach demanded an entirely different psychology and body mechanics, requiring the swordsman to coordinate two independent weapons while maintaining perfect balance and awareness. The advantages were considerable. The second blade could parry while the first attacked, or both could strike simultaneously from different angles, creating dilemmas for opponents trained only in conventional techniques. Yet the true genius of Musashi's dual sword style lay not in its technical aspects, but in the philosophical underpinnings. For him, the two swords represented the harmonization of apparent opposites: strength and flexibility, aggression and patience, the visible and the hidden. This approach reflected his growing connection to Zen Buddhist principles of duality transcendence, where seeming contradictions dissolve into a unified whole when viewed from a higher perspective. As Musashi's reputation grew through a series of spectacular duels, so too evolved his understanding of what it meant to walk the way of the warrior. Bushido, literally the way of the warrior, encompassed far more than combat proficiency. It represented a comprehensive ethical code and lifestyle that addressed every aspect of a samurai's existence, from battlefield conduct to artistic pursuits, from political loyalty to personal integrity. For most samurai of the era, Bushido centered on absolute loyalty to one's lord, willingness to die with honor rather than live with shame, and adherence to formalized codes of behavior. Musashi, ever the innovator, interpreted these principles through his unique lens. Rather than serving a single master, he remained masterless throughout his life, a rare ronin who chose independence over fealty. Yet he was far from dishonorable. Rather, his loyalty extended to principles rather than persons, to the pursuit of mastery rather than political allegiance. This broader interpretation of the warrior's path led Musashi to place unprecedented emphasis on mental discipline. The true way of martial arts is to train so that these skills are useful at any time, and to teach these skills so that they will be useful in all things. He would later write in his masterwork, the Book of Five Rings. Through this lens, swordsmanship became not merely a means of victory in combat, but a vehicle for understanding deeper truths about existence itself. As Musashi matured, the influence of Zen Buddhism increasingly permeated his approach to combat and life. The central Zen principles of Mushin, no mind, and Zanshin, remaining mind, became fundamental to his fighting style. Mushin represented a state of consciousness free from distracting thoughts or emotions, a pure awareness unmoved by fear, anger, or anticipation. Zanshin embodied the continued vigilance and presence that remains after an action is completed, the readiness that never truly relaxes. Through rigorous meditation and combat experience, Musashi cultivated the ability to enter combat with a mind as clear as an undisturbed pool, reflecting his opponent's intentions without becoming attached to preconceived notions of how a fight should unfold. This mental clarity allowed him to respond to each moment with perfect appropriateness, unhindered by fear of death or desire for glory. As he famously advised, "You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain." This Zen-influenced approach stood in stark contrast to many of his contemporaries, who relied heavily on practiced techniques and predetermined sequences of movement. Where others sought victory through overwhelming force or technical superiority, Musashi discovered that true mastery came through adaptability, awareness, and the ability to harmonize with ever-changing circumstances. Musashi's dedication to his path came at considerable personal cost. Historical records suggest he never married nor established a conventional family life. His relationships appear to have been primarily those of teacher and student, master and apprentice. Even his adopted son, Iori, seems to have been chosen primarily as a successor to carry forward his teachings, rather than as an object of paternal affection. This solitary existence extended beyond his personal relationships to encompass his entire lifestyle. While the Tokugawa period saw many samurai transition into bureaucratic roles or cultivate artistic pursuits as primary occupations, Musashi remained first and foremost a swordsman, even as he developed considerable skill in painting, calligraphy, and sculpture. His famous painting Shrike on a Dead Branch captures this essence of solitary vigilance. The predatory bird perched in perfect stillness, ready to strike with lethal precision when the moment arrives. The parallels between Musashi's artistic and martial expressions reveal a unifying philosophy. Both required the same qualities of disciplined attention, economy of movement, and harmony between technique and intuition. As he approached his final years, these connections would become increasingly apparent, culminating in his written works that distilled decades of hard-won wisdom into principles applicable far beyond the narrow context of swordsmanship. Perhaps Musashi's most profound departure from traditional Bushido was his emphasis on practical effectiveness over ceremonial form. Where many schools of the era placed great importance on elaborate rituals, precise stances, and aesthetically pleasing movements, Musashi ruthlessly stripped away anything that did not contribute directly to victory. "Think of what is right and true," he advised, "not what is merely traditional or expected." This pragmatism extended to his famous dueling tactics. When facing the renowned Sasaki Kojirō on Gonryu Island in 1612, Musashi arrived deliberately late, disheveled, and wielding a wooden sword carved from a boat, or rather than the expected steel blade. These choices, calculated psychological warfare, unsettled his opponent before the duel even began. By rejecting the conventional ceremony surrounding such encounters, Musashi gained decisive advantages that contributed to his victory over the accomplished swordsman. Yet to characterize Musashi as merely pragmatic would be to miss the deeper philosophical underpinnings of his approach. His was not a rejection of tradition for its own sake, but rather a recognition that true mastery requires transcending form to grasp the formless principles that lie beneath. As he would later write, "You can only fight the way you practice," emphasizing that essence matters more than appearance, substance more than style. As Musashi entered the latter phase of his life, his attention increasingly turned toward preserving and transmitting the insights gained through decades of study and combat. Having faced over 60 duels without defeat, he had little left to prove regarding his martial prowess. Instead, a new challenge emerged: how to distill such embodied knowledge into teachings that others could follow. This transition from warrior to teacher marked the beginning of Musashi's most enduring legacy. The principles he developed would soon take shape through his establishment of the Niten Ichi-ryū, two heavens as one, school, and ultimately through his written works. But the path that led to this point, the relentless pursuit of perfection through direct experience rather than theoretical study, would remain the foundation upon which everything else was built. The warrior who once stood alone on countless battlefields and dueling grounds was preparing to influence generations yet unborn, extending his reach far beyond what even the sharpest sword could accomplish. For in Musashi's understanding, the ultimate purpose of the sword was not to take life, but to perfect it. Not merely to defeat external enemies, but to conquer the internal obstacles of fear, hesitation, and attachment that prevent true mastery. But Musashi's genius extended far beyond his philosophical outlook. It manifested in his revolutionary fighting style, a system so effective it would become legendary throughout Japan and eventually the world, influencing not only martial arts but strategic thinking across numerous disciplines. This innovative approach to combat would become the foundation of his enduring legacy, transforming the solitary wanderer into one of history's most revered martial artists. In the theater of mortal combat, where traditional warriors relied on established forms and techniques passed down through generations, one man dared to forge a path entirely his own. Miyamoto Musashi's revolutionary approach to swordsmanship, the Niten Ichi-ryū, or two heavens as one style, stands as perhaps his most tangible contribution to martial arts history. This was no mere technical innovation, but a philosophical revelation embodied in steel and movement. A system that challenged centuries of established doctrine and proved its worth through dozens of life-or-death encounters. Through his dual sword technique, Musashi transformed from a formidable duelist into a legend whose shadow stretches across centuries. The origins of Niten Ichi-ryū arose not from academic study or inherited tradition, but through Musashi's relentless experimentation on the battlefield and in countless duels. During Japan's turbulent Sengoku period, conventional swordsmen typically wielded the katana with both hands, occasionally drawing their shorter wakizashi only when their primary weapon was lost or when fighting in extremely close quarters. What distinguished Musashi's approach was his deliberate, simultaneous wielding of both blades as an integrated fighting system, a radical departure from established practice. According to his own writings, this insight did not come as a sudden revelation, but evolved gradually through combat experience. Musashi discovered that wielding two weapons created unique advantages. While traditional swordsmen committed both hands to a single strike, he could attack and defend simultaneously, creating multiple threats that overwhelmed an opponent's ability to respond effectively. Conventional techniques became insufficient against this unorthodox approach, as defenders trained to counter single-blade movements found themselves facing attacks from unexpected angles. The technical foundations of Niten Ichi-ryū were deceptively straightforward. In Musashi's hands, the katana, long sword, typically served as the primary offensive weapon, while the wakizashi, short sword, complemented it defensively. Yet this simple description belies the sophisticated coordination required. The two blades moved not as independent entities, but as extensions of a unified consciousness, sometimes striking in tandem, sometimes in alternation, creating an unpredictable rhythm that disrupted an opponent's timing and distance calculations. Most notably, Musashi eschewed the rigid stances common in traditional schools, where other styles emphasized perfect posture and formalized movements. Niten Ichi-ryū prioritized fluid adaptability. "You should not have a favorite stance," Musashi would later write, underscoring his belief that fixation on any single approach created exploitable weaknesses. Instead, his style flowed between 5 primary positions, or ways, each suited to different tactical situations and seamlessly transitioning between them as combat evolved. While many martial traditions of the era emphasized kata, formalized patterns, and controlled practice, Musashi tested and refined his techniques in the most unforgiving environment imaginable: actual mortal combat. The duels that punctuated his life serve not merely as colorful anecdotes, but as critical developmental milestones in the evolution of his fighting style. Each encounter against skilled opponents revealed both strengths to enhance and weaknesses to address, forming the foundation of a system proven effective against the finest swordsmen of his age. His earliest significant trials came against the Yoshioka school, one of Kyoto's most prestigious martial arts academies. What began as a single challenge against Yoshioka Seijiro, the school's head, escalated into a vendetta that would test Musashi's tactical ingenuity as well as his physical skills. After defeating Seijiro in their initial encounter, Musashi faced the man's brother, Denshikiro, who sought revenge for the family's honor. Once again, Musashi emerged victorious, this time employing his dual sword technique to devastating effect. However, it was the third confrontation that truly demonstrated Musashi's strategic brilliance. The Yoshioka school, desperate to restore its reputation, arranged an ambush disguised as a formal duel. Instead of facing a single opponent, Musashi would confront the young heir Matashikiro, surrounded by dozens of armed retainers. Learning of this treachery, Musashi did not flee or seek to renegotiate terms. Instead, he arrived hours early, concealed himself, and then launched a sudden attack against the unprepared group, cutting down Matashikiro before anyone could react and fighting his way free through stunned opponents. This encounter exemplifies a central principle of Musashi's approach. Adaptability trumps tradition, and survival demands pragmatism rather than rigid adherence to formal expectations. In a society where ritual and precise etiquette governed even matters of life and death, Musashi's willingness to abandon ceremony in favor of effectiveness represented a profound paradigm shift. No account of Musashi's martial career can overlook his most famous duel against Sasaki Kojirō in 1612, a confrontation that perfectly exemplifies his strategic approach to combat. Kojirō was himself a formidable swordsman who had developed a distinctive style centered around his personally crafted nodachi, an exceptionally long sword, nicknamed the drying pole for its imposing length. With this weapon, Kojirō had developed techniques that allowed him to strike opponents from beyond the reach of conventional swords, creating an advantage that few could counter. Rather than attempting to match Kojirō's weapon directly, Musashi engaged in what modern analysts would recognize as psychological warfare. First, he deliberately arrived late to the designated meeting place on Gonryu Island, forcing his opponent to wait in the hot sun, growing increasingly anxious and irritated. Then, rather than appearing in formal attire with traditional weapons, Musashi arrived disheveled, having carved a wooden sword from a boat or during his journey to the island. This apparent disrespect served multiple tactical purposes. It unsettled Kojirō emotionally, potentially compromising his judgment and technique. The wooden weapon, while seemingly primitive, was carefully crafted to be slightly longer than Kojirō's famous blade, negating the reach advantage that formed the cornerstone of his fighting style. Additionally, by arriving as the sun rose over the water behind him, Musashi positioned himself so that his opponent would be partially blinded by glare during their encounter. The duel itself was brief but decisive. As Kojirō drew his weapon with his characteristic speed, Musashi countered with a perfectly timed strike to his opponent's forehead. Some accounts suggest that the wooden sword's greater length allowed Musashi to land this decisive blow before Kojirō's cut could reach him. Others emphasize that by striking the head rather than attempting to penetrate armor or clothing, Musashi maximized the effectiveness of his improvised weapon. Regardless of specific details, the outcome was unambiguous. Kojirō fell, mortally wounded, while Musashi remained unscathed. This victory, achieved through a combination of psychological manipulation, environmental awareness, and tactical improvisation, cemented Musashi's reputation. More importantly, it demonstrated the effectiveness of his strategic approach. Understanding that combat begins long before blades are drawn and extends beyond mere physical technique to encompass the entire context in which conflict occurs. For all its physical innovation, what truly distinguished Musashi's approach was his recognition that combat is primarily mental rather than physical. "You can only fight the way you practice," he observed, emphasizing that preparation extends far beyond mere repetition of techniques. It encompasses cultivation of appropriate mental states, situational awareness, and the ability to read opponents with penetrating insight. Central to Musashi's mental approach was the concept of empty mind, Mushin, drawn from Zen Buddhist practice. This state, not to be confused with inattention or distraction, represents awareness freed from fixation on particular thoughts or emotions. In combat terms, it allows instantaneous response unclouded by fear, anger, or excessive calculation. The important thing in strategy is to suppress the enemy's useful actions, but allow his useless actions, Musashi wrote, highlighting how psychological insight could turn an opponent's own patterns against them. This emphasis on mental conditioning manifested in Musashi's unusual training methods. Where conventional schools might emphasize repetitive practice of formalized movements, he advocated diverse challenges under varying conditions. He trained with weapons of different weights and dimensions to avoid becoming dependent on specific tools. He practiced in darkness to sharpen sensory awareness beyond visual cues. He engaged in duels with practitioners of different styles to prevent becoming predictable. Through these methods, he developed not just technical proficiency but adaptive intelligence, the ability to respond effectively to novel situations. Perhaps most significantly, Musashi recognized that strategy extends beyond immediate tactical concerns to encompass broader contextual factors. His approach to the duel with Kojirō demonstrates how he leveraged time, arriving late, environment, positioning relative to the sun, psychology, unsettling his opponent, and equipment, crafting a weapon suited to the specific challenge, to create advantages before the actual exchange of blows. This holistic view of conflict, where victory is determined by factors far beyond mere skill with weapons, would later influence military and business strategists across cultures and centuries. While Musashi's reputation rests primarily on his prowess in individual combat, his strategic principles found application in larger-scale conflicts as well. During Japan's tumultuous Sengoku period, he participated in several major battles, including Sekigahara, 1600, and the Shimabara Rebellion, 1637–38. In these contexts, his approach to strategy scaled upward from individual duels to battlefield tactics. The same principles that guided his development of Niten Ichi-ryū, adaptability, awareness of context, psychological insight, and pragmatic innovation, proved equally valuable in coordinating larger forces. His emphasis on understanding terrain, timing attacks to maximize advantage, and maintaining mental clarity amid chaos translated effectively to the complexity of full-scale warfare. Whether commanding troops or fighting as an individual warrior, Musashi approached conflict as fundamentally a problem of information, perception, and decision-making rather than merely physical confrontation. As Japan transitioned from the warring states period to the relative stability of Tokugawa rule, Musashi's strategic thinking found new applications in peacetime contexts. His approach to understanding conflict extended naturally to disciplines ranging from architecture, where he designed structures with defensive advantages, to governance, where he advised lords on maintaining authority. The universality of his principles, their applicability across diverse domains, suggests their foundation in deeper insights about human nature and interaction rather than merely technical expertise in swordsmanship. This breadth of application highlights a central aspect of Musashi's genius: his ability to recognize patterns across seemingly disparate domains and extract principles with universal relevance. You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain, he wrote, encapsulating his belief that specific techniques matter less than the underlying principles they express. This perspective allowed him to move fluidly between different contexts, from duels to battles to governance to art, carrying insights from each domain into others. Throughout his career, Musashi displayed remarkable creativity in developing novel approaches to combat situations. Beyond his signature dual sword technique, He continually sought advantages through unconventional methods that disrupted opponents' expectations and preparations. This pattern of innovation reflects not merely technical creativity, but a fundamental understanding that advantage often lies in forcing adversaries to confront unfamiliar situations. One particularly notable example involves his use of psychological timing. Traditional Japanese sword schools placed great emphasis on proper etiquette and ritual timing in duels, with combatants drawing their weapons simultaneously according to formalized protocols. Musashi frequently disrupted these expectations by either drawing extremely quickly, before his opponent was fully prepared, or deliberately slowing his movements to create hesitation. Either approach disrupted the opponent's practiced rhythms, creating momentary confusion that Musashi could exploit. Similarly, he often varied the distance of engagement, sometimes closing rapidly to nullify an opponent's reach advantage or retreating unexpectedly to draw overcommit attacks. While traditional schools typically train practitioners to maintain specific optimal distances for their techniques, Musashi's fluid approach enabled him to constantly shift between ranges, preventing opponents from settling into their preferred fighting patterns. Perhaps most fundamentally, Musashi recognized that combat rarely occurs under ideal conditions. Accordingly, he trained in all weather, on varied terrain, and with imperfect equipment to develop adaptability that would serve him regardless of circumstances. "You must practice day and night in order to make quick decisions," he wrote, emphasizing that true mastery means functioning effectively even when conditions are far from optimal. The extraordinary achievements of Musashi's martial career came at significant personal cost. His singular dedication to perfecting his art required sacrifices in virtually every other domain of life. Historical records suggest he never married or established conventional family relationships. He maintained few close friendships, living instead as a wanderer focused entirely on his pursuit of martial mastery. Material comfort, social standing, and emotional connection, priorities that guided most lives in his era, remained secondary concerns throughout his existence. This austere lifestyle was not merely incidental to his development, but integral to it. By removing distractions and attachments, Musashi created space for total immersion in his practice. His famous neglect of personal appearance, he rarely bathed and often wore simple, worn clothing, symbolizes this prioritization. Every aspect of his existence served his central purpose of perfecting the way of the sword and the strategic mind that wielded it. Modern perspectives might question whether such extreme dedication represents wisdom or imbalance. Certainly, Musashi's approach stands at odds with contemporary ideals of work-life balance and holistic well-being. Yet his example raises provocative questions about the relationship between greatness and sacrifice. Would his innovations have been possible without this singular focus? Does transcendent achievement in any domain require corresponding renunciation in others? Musashi himself seems to have viewed these sacrifices as neither virtuous nor regrettable, but simply necessary for his chosen path. Generally speaking, the way of the warrior is resolute acceptance of death, he wrote, suggesting that true commitment to any meaningful endeavor requires willingness to sacrifice lesser concerns. His life embodies a challenging proposition: that extraordinary achievement demands extraordinary dedication, often at the expense of conventional happiness or comfort. As Musashi aged, having survived countless duels and established his reputation beyond question, the focus of his strategic thinking gradually shifted inward. The young warrior who sought external victories through physical prowess evolved into a mature master, increasingly concerned with internal mastery, control of mind, emotion, and spirit. This evolution reflects a deepening understanding that true strength originates not in technical skill alone, but in the quality of awareness that directs it. In his 40s, Musashi adopted Iori, a young orphan who would become his heir and help document his teachings. This rare formation of a lasting personal bond suggests an emerging recognition of legacy and transmission, concerns that transcend individual achievement to embrace continuity across generations. Similarly, his increasing interest in artistic pursuits like painting, calligraphy, and craftsmanship indicates a broadening conception of mastery beyond purely martial domains. This transition from external to internal focus, from conquest to cultivation, represents not an abandonment of his earlier path, but its natural maturation. The principles that guided his development of Niten Ichi-ryū remain central, but their application expanded from the narrow context of physical combat to encompass broader questions of perception, decision-making, and harmonious action. The warrior who had once sought perfect victory now pursued perfect understanding. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, his austere lifestyle, Musashi eventually turned inward, seeking not just external triumphs, but internal peace. In his later years, he became as much a philosopher and artist as a warrior, translating the insights gained through combat into principles that transcended the battlefield. The master swordsman who had faced death countless times now contemplated immortality of a different kind, the enduring impact of wisdom preserved and transmitted to future generations. As the shadows lengthened across Miyamoto Musashi's life, the undefeated swordsman who had carved his legacy through 61 duels underwent a profound transformation. The warrior who once lived by the edge of his blade gradually redirected his formidable focus toward realms of artistic expression and philosophical inquiry. This evolution was not an abandonment of his martial spirit, but rather its transcendence, a recognition that the principles governing effective combat contained universal truths applicable to all aspects of existence. In his final decades, Musashi would reveal himself not merely as Japan's greatest swordsman, but as a Renaissance figure whose insights into human nature, strategy, and aesthetics continue to resonate across centuries and cultures. While traditional accounts of samurai often emphasize a dichotomy between martial prowess and artistic refinement, Musashi recognized these as complementary expressions of the same underlying principles. Under the patronage of Lord Hosokawa Tadatoshi in Kumamoto, he found both protection and the freedom to explore creative pursuits that had long simmered beneath his warrior's exterior. Far from viewing this transition as a retirement from his life's work, Musashi approached painting, calligraphy, and sculpture with the same disciplined intensity that had characterized his swordsmanship. His artistic style, known as Ipitsusen, one-stroke, embodied the same economy of movement and decisive execution that defined his fighting technique. Whether depicting birds perched on barren branches, landscapes shrouded in mist, or scenes from nature, Musashi's brushwork demonstrated remarkable restraint. Each stroke contained precisely the right amount of ink and pressure. Nothing superfluous, nothing lacking. This minimalist approach reflected his martial philosophy that excess movement wastes energy and creates vulnerability, while insufficient commitment leads to failure. Among his most celebrated works, Shrike Perched on a Dead Branch, Kaboka Maigakizu, perfectly embodies this aesthetic. The painting depicts a small predatory bird vigilantly surveying its domain from a withered tree limb. Art historians note how the composition balances emptiness with presence, stillness with implied movement. The bird poised to strike, much like Musashi himself throughout his dueling career. The parallel between the solitary hunter and the masterless samurai is unmistakable, suggesting that Musashi saw in this creature a reflection of his own existence. His artistic contributions extended beyond painting to include metalwork and sculpture as well. Musashi crafted tsuba, sword guards, with designs that were both beautiful and functional, reflecting his understanding that aesthetic appeal need not compromise practical effectiveness. These works further demonstrate how thoroughly he had integrated his martial insights with artistic expression, each discipline informing and enriching the other rather than existing in separate domains. Lord Hosokawa recognized the extraordinary value of Musashi's artistic output, preserving many works that might otherwise have been lost to time. This patronage relationship offered Musashi not just material support, but legitimacy within aristocratic circles that might otherwise have dismissed a masterless swordsman, regardless of his reputation. Through this connection, the former wanderer gained access to cultural traditions and artistic resources that enriched his creative development. While Musashi's artistic legacy would alone secure his place in Japanese cultural history, it is his written work, particularly the Book of Five Rings, Go-Rin no Sho, that has carried his influence far beyond his homeland and era. Composed in the final years of his life and completed shortly before his death in 1645. This text distills decades of martial experience into principles applicable to any conflict or challenge. Understanding that his physical techniques would die with him unless preserved through writing, Musashi created not merely a technical manual, but a comprehensive philosophy of strategy. The work's structure reveals its author's systematic thinking and symbolic understanding. Divided into 5 scrolls: Earth, Water, Fire, Wind, and Void. The text progresses from concrete fundamentals to increasingly abstract concepts. This organization mirrors traditional Japanese elemental philosophy, while establishing a framework that moves readers from basic principles to advanced applications. The Earth Scroll lays the foundation, establishing Musashi's approach to strategy as a universal discipline applicable across contexts. Think of what is right and true, he instructs, emphasizing that effective strategy begins with clear perception unclouded by preconceptions or wishful thinking. Here he outlines his core belief that principles must be tested through practical application rather than accepted through tradition or authority. A radical position in Japan's hierarchical society. In the Water Scroll, Musashi explores adaptability and fluidity in technique. Just as water conforms to any container while maintaining its essential nature, the strategic mind must remain flexible while holding firm to fundamental principles. You should not have a favorite weapon, he advises, warning against over-specialization that creates predictability and limits one's options. This section particularly emphasizes reading situations accurately and responding appropriately rather than forcing predetermined approaches regardless of circumstances. The Fire Scroll addresses the moment of decisive action, when analysis must yield to execution. Here Musashi discusses timing, intensity, and commitment. When you decide to attack, keep calm and dash in quickly, forestalling the enemy, he writes, highlighting how momentum can overwhelm an opponent's defenses. The metaphor of fire captures both the transformative power of decisive action and the danger of uncontrolled emotion that can consume one's judgment. With a wind scroll, Musashi turns his analytical gaze outward, examining other schools of swordsmanship and their limitations. This section demonstrates his remarkable intellectual honesty. Rather than dismissing alternative approaches, he studies them carefully to extract valuable insights while identifying weaknesses. This willingness to learn from diverse sources while maintaining critical perspective exemplifies the breadth of Musashi's strategic thinking. The final Void Scroll ventures into territory that transcends technical instruction, exploring the state of consciousness that emerges through mastery. By knowing things that exist, you can know that which does not exist, Musashi writes, suggesting that complete understanding of the tangible world opens perception to deeper realities. This section integrates Zen Buddhist concepts with martial strategy, pointing toward a unity of being where distinction between self and action dissolves. Throughout the text, certain themes recur with striking consistency. The value of direct experience over theoretical knowledge, the importance of seeing situations as they truly are rather than as one wishes them to be, the necessity of consistent practice, and the integration of strategy across all domains of life. These principles resonate far beyond swordsmanship, offering insights applicable to business, politics, creative pursuits, and personal development. As Musashi approached the end of his extraordinary life, he chose to withdraw even further from society, eventually living as a hermit in a cave on Mount Iwado in Kumamoto Prefecture. This final retreat represented not escapism, but a deliberate choice to distill his lifetime of experience into its most essential wisdom. During this period of profound isolation, he composed not only the Book of Five Rings, but also a shorter, more personal text known as Dakodo, The Path of Aloneness. Written just days before his death in 1645, Dakodo consists of 21 precepts that encapsulate Musashi's philosophy in its most concentrated form. Where the Book of Five Rings addresses strategy and technique, Dakodo focuses on character and personal conduct. These final reflections reveal a man who had transcended concern with victory or defeat to contemplate the nature of a life well lived. Several principles stand out as particularly revealing of Musashi's mature wisdom. "Accept everything just the way it is," begins the text, expressing a profound acceptance of reality that echoes Zen teachings. "Do not seek pleasure for its own sake, and do not collect weapons or practice with weapons beyond what is useful. Counsel against attachments and excesses that distract from essential purpose. Respect Buddha and the gods without counting on their help." Suggests spiritual awareness coupled with self-reliance. Perhaps most poignantly, Musashi advises, "Do not regret what you have done." This principle speaks to his acceptance of mortality, and the choices that shaped his unconventional life. Having lived by his own standards rather than conforming to social expectations, the aging warrior embraced the consequences of his decisions without romanticizing or lamenting them. This clear-eyed acceptance of responsibility reflects a man at peace with his legacy, whatever judgment others might pass upon it. The ascetic conditions of Musashi's final years, living in a cave with minimal possessions, were consistent with his lifelong pattern of austerity. Yet this period was remarkably productive creatively. Beyond his writing, he crafted a wooden statue of Kannon, the Buddhist goddess of mercy, demonstrating that his spiritual awareness had developed alongside his martial and strategic understanding. This act of devotional creation suggests that the warrior who had taken so many lives sought harmony with deeper principles of compassion and universal connection as he prepared for his own death. Throughout his evolution from warrior to artist and philosopher, one principle remained constant in Musashi's approach: the commitment to continuous improvement. From his earliest duels to his final artistic works, he viewed each endeavor as an opportunity to refine both technique and understanding. "Today is victory over yourself of yesterday," he wrote, emphasizing that true competition is not against others, but against one's previous limitations. This philosophy manifested in his daily practices. Rising before dawn, he devoted hours to meditation, calligraphy, and weapons training well into his later years. Even after achieving unparalleled mastery, he approached each day as a student rather than a master, seeking new insights and refinements. This humility, recognizing that perfection remains forever beyond reach while constantly striving toward it, characterizes authentic mastery in any discipline. Musashi's approach to improvement was systematic rather than haphazard. He advocated deliberate practice, focused on specific aspects of performance rather than mindless repetition. "You must practice day and night in order to make quick decisions," he advised, recognizing that expertise emerges through intentional effort rather than mere experience. This methodical approach to development anticipated modern understanding of expertise acquisition by centuries. Central to this philosophy was Musashi's integration of body and mind. Unlike many martial traditions that emphasized either physical technique or spiritual development, he insisted on their inseparability. Physical actions express mental states, while mental clarity manifests through precise movement. This holistic understanding meant that improvement in any domain, martial, artistic, or philosophical, contributed to overall development rather than existing in isolation. Perhaps most significant was Musashi's recognition that mastery is not a fixed destination, but a continuous journey. Throughout his life, he reinvented himself repeatedly. From brash young duelist to strategic commander, from wandering swordsman to established teacher, from warrior to artist and philosopher. Each transition built upon rather than replaced what came before, creating an integrated wisdom that transcended specialization. Musashi's life presents a fascinating paradox regarding human connection. On one hand, he lived largely as an outsider, rejecting conventional social bonds and familial relationships in favor of his solitary path. He never married, sired no biological children, and maintained few close friendships. His austere lifestyle and relentless focus on his art seemingly left little room for ordinary human attachments. Yet evidence suggests that this isolation was not absolute. His adoption of Iori as his son and heir indicates recognition of the need to transmit knowledge across generations. His relationship with Lord Hosokawa demonstrates capacity for loyalty and service when aligned with his principles. The care with which he preserved his insights through writing reveals concern for future students he would never meet personally. This tension between isolation and connection raises profound questions about the nature of human fulfillment. Modern perspectives often emphasize social relationships as essential to well-being, potentially viewing Musashi's solitary existence as incomplete or imbalanced. Yet his life suggests an alternative path to meaning, one centered on self-mastery, creative expression, and philosophical inquiry, rather than conventional social integration. The reclusive final years on Mount Iwado represent the culmination of this paradox. Physically isolated in his cave dwelling, Musashi nonetheless reached toward connection through his writing and art, creating works explicitly intended to guide future generations. His withdrawal from society did not represent rejection of humanity, but rather a different mode of engagement, one that transcended immediate social circles to address universal human experiences across time and culture. This apparent contradiction resolves when viewed through the lens of Musashi's philosophical understanding. His concept of void suggests transcendence of false dichotomies, including the supposed opposition between connection and solitude. From this perspective, authentic relationship emerges not from dependency or convention, but from honest exchange between fully developed individuals, whether present physically or across centuries through preserved wisdom. While firmly rooted in the specific context of feudal Japan and its martial traditions, Musashi's insights demonstrate remarkable transferability across contexts. The principles he articulated through swordsmanship readily translate to contemporary challenges, explaining why his writings continue to influence fields ranging from business management to personal development, military strategy to creative arts. In business contexts, Musashi's emphasis on clarity of perception, decisiveness, and adaptability offers valuable guidance for leadership and competition. His warning against attachment to particular methods, "Do not collect unnecessary things," speaks directly to organizational tendencies toward bureaucratic rigidity and resistance to innovation. Corporate leaders worldwide have drawn inspiration from his strategic thinking, finding in the Book of Five Rings a framework for navigating market competition and organizational challenges. For individual development, Musashi's philosophy of continuous improvement provides a roadmap for meaningful growth. His integration of technical skill with mental discipline and philosophical understanding offers an alternative to fragmented approaches that separate professional expertise from personal development. The discipline he modeled, consistent daily practice, honest self-assessment, and commitment to fundamental principles, translates directly to contemporary pursuits from athletics to academic achievement. Even his artistic approach holds lessons for modern creativity. The one-stroke method exemplifies concentration, economy of expression, and decisive execution, qualities valuable in any creative field. His integration of tradition with innovation demonstrates how respect for established forms can coexist with personal expression and technical advancement. A balance many contemporary artists struggle to achieve. Perhaps most fundamentally, Musashi's philosophy addresses universal human concerns. How to face adversity with courage, how to develop genuine skill rather than superficial appearance, how to make decisions amid uncertainty, and how to live meaningfully in light of mortality. These questions transcend historical and cultural boundaries, explaining why his wisdom resonates with readers separated from him by centuries and continents. Despite this universal relevance, Musashi's philosophy presents certain challenges for contemporary application. His uncompromising commitment to his path, rejecting conventional comforts, relationships, and security, stands at odds with modern values prioritizing work-life balance and diverse forms of fulfillment. Few today would embrace his level of austerity or single-minded focus, raising questions about whether his principles can be meaningfully adopted without his extreme lifestyle. Critics might reasonably ask whether selective application of Musashi's teachings risks distortion, cherry-picking appealing concepts while ignoring their interconnection with more demanding aspects of his approach. Can his strategic insights be truly understood separate from the disciplined practice and lifestyle that produced them? Does applying his wisdom to contemporary business or creative pursuits extract these principles from their essential context? Musashi himself might have anticipated these concerns. His emphasis on adaptation to circumstances rather than rigid formalism suggests openness to reinterpretation in new contexts. "You should investigate this thoroughly," he frequently advises, encouraging readers to test principles through direct experience rather than accepting them on authority, even his own. This empirical approach allows for contextual adaptation while maintaining fidelity to underlying insights. Perhaps the most appropriate response to this paradox lies in Musashi's own concept of the way, understanding principles deeply enough that they can be expressed authentically in varied circumstances. Just as he adapted his fighting style to different opponents and situations, contemporary students of his philosophy might adapt its expression to modern contexts while preserving its essential wisdom. The specific practices may change, but the underlying principles, clear perception, disciplined practice, strategic thinking, and integration of mind and body, remain valuable across contexts. When Musashi died peacefully in 1645 at approximately 62 years of age, he left behind far more than technical innovations in swordsmanship. His multifaceted legacy continues to influence Japanese culture and global thought in the nearly 4 centuries since his passing. As a martial artist, he established a school, Niten Ichi-ryū, that survives to this day, preserving his distinctive two-sword techniques through generations of practitioners. As an artist, his paintings remain treasured cultural artifacts displaying the controlled abandonment that characterized his aesthetic sensibility. As a philosopher and writer, his works continue to be published, translated, and studied worldwide. Perhaps most significantly, Musashi has transcended historical specificity to become an archetypal figure representing the integration of martial prowess, artistic sensitivity, and philosophical depth. In Japanese popular culture, he appears frequently in novels, films, manga, and other media, sometimes historically accurate, sometimes heavily fictionalized, but consistently portrayed as embodying the highest ideals of the samurai tradition. Internationally, he has become synonymous with strategic mastery and disciplined self-development. This cultural resonance speaks to something profound in Musashi's example that transcends his specific historical context. In a figure who lived nearly 4 centuries ago under radically different social conditions, contemporary individuals from diverse backgrounds continue to find inspiration and guidance. Whether one aims to succeed in business competition, excel in artistic creation, develop physical disciplines, or simply live with greater awareness and purpose, Musashi's integrated approach to mastery offers valuable insights. Ultimately, Miyamoto Musashi reminds us that true strength lies not in brute force, but in the cultivation of mind, body, and spirit. His life teaches us that mastery is not a destination but a journey, one marked by perseverance, humility, and unwavering commitment. As we navigate our own challenges, let us carry forward Musashi's lessons, embracing the art of living with courage, clarity, and purpose. In his own immortal words, "Do nothing which is of no use." Subscribe and welcome to the Empire.